Hello again, Lottie-Daws and national spectators. Welcome again to another episode of the Lottie-Da Times, the podcast video edition. I am Jeff Cougar Koslowski, coming to you post-World Tournament, and there always kind of feels like this lull. Like once the World Tournament is done, that same energy and excitement that you had before, you just maybe that fire gets lost somewhere. And what we're hoping for with a game we got coming up here is to really get us interested in more of the evolution of the game and how the game continues to change. It's 1867 is a wonderful, wonderful year, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But it's kind of cool that we're thinking of ways to make our game a little bit different here. And one of the best people I could possibly have to ask about that here is our own Marcus Dickson here. Marcus, thanks again for joining up with me.
Yeah, I'm excited about this game. I think this is going to be a fun one to play, a fun one to talk about up on the hill. So yeah, I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I am too. I'm sorry I'm gonna be missing this one, but a lot of guys on our roster really jumped up and said, "Yeah, I want in for this one here." So this should be a whole lot of fun here. We do these not because we're looking to get away from 1867. 1867 has some really important ties to the Detroit area. It has some really important ties to the baseball world in general, and we're not going to be getting away from that. I mean, it will still always be 1867 on Walnut Grove, except for maybe a small handful of times where we're looking to shake things up a little bit here, but we can't talk about it enough. I mean, 1867 is a great year. People of color are maybe not necessarily welcomed to play, but there is no rule barring people of color from playing. So in theory, everyone can play.
That's going to come in the December of 1867. We're going to have that first color line, one of the first shameful moments of baseball history.
Yeah, that's like you said, unfortunately it's on the way, but in the summer, we could still welcome people in that way. We could also welcome peoples of all genders. There's nothing that says women can't play. Societally, culturally, it may not necessarily be a common thing, but there's really only one thing that's gonna get you immediately banned from any sort of game here, and that's if you're taking money from this game. So now others are finding ways around that one. But if you are found to be accepting money, then no, you have no place on here. So the summer of 67 is a wonderful time, but that doesn't mean we don't get a little itchy to try some other things here. So Marcus, let's back ourselves up to what we as Greenfield Village have done. We've played a few games before. How have they gone so far? What years have we tried out? And how do you think the games have come from, at least as far as we've played them so far?
Well, we played a game in June using the rules from 1845. And so those are the rules that we really think of as if not the absolute first, the best known first rules of what came to be known as New York baseball. And they were written by, this set was written down by the Knickerbocker Club of New York. They're often just referred to as the Knickerbocker rules. They're really the origin point for a game that is decidedly different from other forms of baseball. And it begins to look like what we recognize. That game went really well. Some people were worried that the game would, at the time you played until somebody scored 21 runs rather than playing 9 innings. And given the nature of that game, some people were worried it would be over in 2 innings, but it took 10, which was not uncommon of that era. So we played that 1845 game. We then played 1857, and the reason for that was that by that point, a bit over 20 clubs in New York, Brooklyn, and into New Jersey were playing this New York rules game. And they came together to say, you know what? There's some problems in these rules. There were only 14 rules in 1845 about how to actually play the game. The other rules were about what do you do when people show up late and things like that. Um, so they needed to clarify some things. And so in 1857, that was the first year that they settled on 9 players on a side, 90-foot bases, 9 innings. And so we played that game for the historic importance of those rules, which were often called the laws of baseball. And in fact, in many cases, even in the 1860s and 70s, players would refer to the 1857 rules and the 1857 year as the birth of baseball. We now play 1867 as our typical, given the importance in Detroit of the Detroit Baseball Club's World's Baseball Tournament held in 1867. And then we get to 1876, which we'll play on Sunday of this coming weekend, which is the first year of the National League. Now, professionalism came into baseball in 1869. That was the first year players were allowed to be openly paid. In 1871, we had the creation of the National Association of Professional Baseball Players, the first professional league. That lasted until 1875, and it was still very much an association of clubs. And clubs came and went, and they lasted or they didn't last. Many of the clubs never made it through a season. In order to join the association, you just had to pay a $10 entrance fee. That was it. And eventually that association just fell apart due to a lack of structure. And then the businessmen moved in. And the National League was founded, and these really were no longer clubs in the way that we thought of them in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. They really were becoming teams with owners of those teams in a lot of ways. So, but that's an important moment in our baseball history. It is the formation of the National League. And so we chose to play that year as well, and we're looking forward to that.
So we've had with us at Greenfield Village, we've had a game based on rules from the 1840s, a game based on the rules of 1850s, our traditional 1867, and now we're moving into the 1870s. And so for our hardcore dedicated fans, our spectators who come with regularity, if they've seen the 40s, 50s, 60s games, now we're getting into kind of into 1876 here. So we're getting kind of the social, cultural, evolution of the game here, Marcus. But let's talk like the action on the field. All right. So how, before we get into the literal rules and how literally the rules are evolving here, what is the game looking like between 1876 and 1867? Like, what is the mindset of the player? What sorts of things are changing at that point?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that 1867 is the tail end of the amateur era. We know that there were a lot of people who, if they weren't getting paid, especially in New York, New Jersey, Brooklyn, we know that if they weren't getting paid, they were getting something. There were lots of times where they might be given a business to run. But so it's the tail end of the amateur era. But there is still a real emphasis on that gentlemanly conduct, and the newspapers still promote that and talk about it and celebrate it. Although there are certainly accounts that in the summer of 1867, Henry Chadwick writes an extensive editorial about how we're never going to get anybody to be willing to be umpire if umpires keep getting abused as much as they're being abused. So we know that there were some aspirational things that may not always have been lived up to, but still those were clearly aspirations. This was an amateur game played by amateur players, governed by amateur umpires, and they were clubs where people who might not even be players, they just wanted to be part of it, were members of those clubs. That's really going to fall away in a lot of ways as we move towards this is a professional spectacle. In the 1860s, we were looking at games that were played by people who did other things. They had other jobs, and they were playing the games, and their scores could be reported in the national newspaper. The person who worked in the store, or the lawyer, or the farmer could have his exploits reported in the local and the national papers as the amateur game. By the time we get to 1876, what's primarily being reported on are the professional teams. And so it has become a heavier focus on a little bit of the celebrity aspect, a heavier focus on the professional teams. The emphasis on the amateur teams is really falling away quickly.
So yeah, we're not seeing nearly as much of some of these teams from some of these other smaller areas. Yeah, it definitely is like, if you're in the state of Michigan, you'd be more interested in what's going on in Detroit, not necessarily Waterford or Parma. You're more thinking of Detroit,
right?
And
many of those, the best amateur clubs, declared themselves professional. Some better off than others, so you were still hearing many of the familiar names of clubs, but you really, those were going to be the big names, the Mutuals, and the Atlantics. It wasn't going to be the Parma Nationals. It wasn't going to be the Ogama or the Custers of Ionia.
So we're starting to see this transition. It definitely seems like if you're going to play baseball, and you want to expect to be good at it, then you better be ready to be a professional athlete. You also see kind of the mindset of the spectator is changing, that they probably now expect to see top tier, high quality, high level play too, right?
Well, yeah, I want to just one thing. I grew up, I played Little League, and then I played like church league softball, and then I played university softball. I loved to play that, and I didn't expect anybody to put it in the newspaper. That kind of amateur play was still happening. Baseball was still being played. It was tremendously popular. It wasn't being reported on in the same way as it would have been earlier. So there were still people going to see the amateur games, my club against your club, in that kind of thing. But what was being reported on, what was being celebrated, was the national professional clubs, and it became a profession. That's certainly true. And if I'm paying to see the game, I probably expect to see some really top quality play. There began to be more rigorous criticism of those who weren't playing well, including criticism of those who didn't maintain their bodies. So in the DeWitt's baseball guide for 1876, for example, there's a lengthy description on the new rules for pitching. And immediately following that is 3 paragraphs about why alcohol is bad for baseball players. And that not for any moral reason, but that if you want to be a top-notch baseball player, you ought to be abstaining. And so it's just that kind of, I'm seeing you're struggling with that idea.
Yeah.
But that kind of idea that you are obligated to exercise, to keep in shape, to have your body in good condition. You weren't really seeing that kind of thing in the newspapers about baseball players in the 1860s. The game was celebrated because the game made you healthy. And now it was, you had to be healthy to play the best game.
It's such a full circle kind of moment. Like, that's one of the reasons why there was such a big push for baseball to be, the quote unquote national pastime, because it is a healthy retreat, both physically and like socially, culturally, for not only the people playing it, but also the people in attendance too. And so, how are you necessarily going to get the best and most healthiest of, retreat when maybe one of the players is maybe not in the best of is baseball shaped,
right,
as opposed to in baseball shape there.
Exactly.
So Marcus, from this, I like you stressing the point of gentlemanly play. And when we say gentlemanly play, it's more this idea of, we're not trying to cheat the game. Better to lose a game fairly, right?
Yeah, I think that's one part of it, right? So, one of my favorite examples, they always talk in 1867 in Haney's, for example, it talks about how the model baseball player doesn't take ungentlemanly advantage of his opponent. That doesn't say he doesn't take advantage of his opponent. You know, if you're going, remember, we're just coming out of the Civil War, and if you're going into battle and you can take legitimate, honorable advantage of your opponent, of a mistake they made or of poor preparation, you did that. And that mindset carried over in a lot of ways. Once we got into the mid 1870s, the professional game, especially once we got into the 1880s, the idea of a gentlemanly advantage versus an advantage was largely gone. Whatever advantage you could get, you might have taken. So here in 1876, we still talk about that. We want to see that fair play. But in some cases, that's more honored in the breach than in the living up to it.
Okay. All right. So how does this game differ? If you want to go by positions, we're going to by the batter, by the field. So what if we're coming to Greenfield Village and you're expecting an 1867 game, what are the main differences you're going to see?
You know, a lot of them are differences of degree. For example, in 1867, the pitching is with a straight arm. You can't bend it out to the side. It's a straight arm underhand. In 1876, that rule isn't as rigid, but you're still not going overhand. You're not going sidearm. You can bring the ball out to the side below your hips. Not even your belt, but below your hips. So you can put some whip on the ball. They call it an underhand throw because you can come to the outside and break your elbow out. So that's one thing. And a second thing is that in 1867, the striker comes up and states his preference. I'd like one about waist high. I'd like one chest high. And you try to do your best to get it there. In 1876, the strike zone has been created, and you choose your strike zone. You either ask for a high ball, which is from essentially belt to shoulders, or a low ball, which is below your knee, just below your knee to your belt. Or some people could ask for a fair ball, which is anything from knees to shoulders. So you've now got a strike zone. And if you get pitches in that zone that you don't swing at, strikes will be called. In 1867, you have to pitch unfairly repeatedly to get a warning, and then strikes can be called, balls can be called, and 3 balls is a base on balls. Here in 1876, every bad pitch is going to be called a ball. And so technically, this is a nuance that I think is very odd. Every third bad pitch is called a ball, and 3 balls is still a base on balls. But you only get a ball on every third bad pitch. So technically, it's 9 bad pitches leads to a base on balls. There are no warnings anymore. Oh, I'm sorry. There is one warning that has been created for the striker. If I get 2 strikes on me, and then the third pitch comes in the strike zone I've asked for, and I don't swing at it, then the umpire will warn me that was a good ball. And then if I don't swing again, then that's the third strike. But if I swing and miss at the third strike, then I'm out. So it's not 4 strikes, it's 3, but 3 with a warning built in. So you're going to see actual calls on every pitch of balls and strikes. That's going to be new. We actually have batter's boxes. Those have been created, and if you step out of the batter's box, it is called a foul strike. And if you do that twice, you're out. They call foul strike and out. The pitcher now has an actual box, a 6 foot by 6 foot box, and he has to operate completely within that. And so if the pitcher steps out of the box, it's a balk. But if he pitches above his hips, it's called a foul balk. And if he has 3 foul balks in 1 inning, the game is forfeited. Uh, so, so pretty serious about that keeping it below the hips. Now, the pitcher is moving with his motion, and it's really hard to call. Was that 2 inches above the hips? 2 inches? Was it really below the hips? So pitchers are always pushing that line, but that's part of what you'll be seeing. You often see, especially with people like Stonewall Goring doing a fair foul hit, an intentional fair foul hit, where in 1867, where the striker hits the ball sharply, it lands barely inside fair territory, skips across the foul line, and goes out. That was a really hard thing to defend, and they were trying to figure out how to avoid that. And so home base is no longer round. It is now diamond shaped, just like the diamond on the bases, and it is fully in foul territory. So home base is not in the field. It is in foul territory. And so the batter's box also doesn't extend into fair territory, given where home base is. One of the reasons for that is that with the hitters now further behind fair territory, it's harder to do that fair foul. It's harder to hit the ball so that it lands in fair and then skips out. That was one of the strategies to do that. In a couple of years, they're going to move home back into fair territory. But here in 1876, it is completely in foul territory. 1876 is the first year that you can advance on a caught foul ball. That idea of returning to your bases before the pitcher gets the ball that we have in 1867, that's gone. And runners can now advance on a caught foul ball in the same way that they can on a caught fair ball with a tag up. But a bound foul out, they can't run on.
So we still have 1 bound foul outs.
Yes, we will have that for 5 more years. We will still have that for 5 more years. Overrunning first base is now well established. It was been established since 1871. So you're going to see those players overrunning the base, but they very distinctly cannot make a move towards second base. There's a couple of things that in 1867, like this happened in our tournament. In 1867, so many things are appeal plays that you don't make a call unless somebody requests a call by the umpire. So, for example, if a player runs out of the baseline to avoid a tag, the umpire sees it but says nothing in 1867 unless a call for judgment is made. By 1876, things like running out of the baseline, the umpire calls without being asked. So we're seeing that process where things that used to be appeal plays are now becoming automatic calls, and that's just going to continue into the future. So there's a lot of things like that. The last one I'll mention, just because I think it's fun, is that under the rules of the National League, before a game, the visiting club sends a telegram, and it must be a telegram, to the home team saying, here are 5 people from your city that we would accept as umpire. And then the home team chooses 2 of those 5 and sends a telegram back to the visiting team to say, these are the 2 we're willing to work with. And then the visiting team reaches out to whichever of those 2 they prefer and tries to arrange to have them serve as umpire. And if they can't get that one, then they go to the second one. But all of this has to be done by telegram. As they're now, unlike 1867, where they might have gotten a game together and then said, hey, who's in the crowd who can be umpire? They're now actually arranging the umpires in advance. So it is just an interesting process as we're moving towards the direction of a professional class of umpires.
It really does. That comes off more as like the importance of the umpire, as opposed to when we think back to our Knickerbocker rules game, where the umpire was basically pulled out of the crowd. and was provided a comfortable chair and perhaps a cool beverage, and wasn't really needed to necessarily pay attention to the game. They could just kind of say whatever they wanted here. Here we are now in 1876. It sounds like, no, the umpire has a serious position here, which
Right.
seems like it's starting to change the spec. I mean, maybe it hasn't changing that much, but now it seems to be that the end result, and not just the banquet, but the end result really is, the win-loss is one of the more important things
Yes.
for a team.
Well, and as I sometimes say, in 1867 and before, the game is often my town or my club against your town or your club for the glory and honor of our club. And now it's my team against your team for my rent money. The idea of why we're playing. It was a big deal in the 1860s or 50s to change clubs. Because they were social clubs, and you were leaving your social club to join a competitor social club. It's a big deal. It was not nearly as big a deal. It was a business transaction to leave a professional team and join a different professional team. That's just like getting a new job. So the idea of loyalty became, a different element, and it was, we're trying to put together our best team. One of the big problems that they had with the National Association of Professional Baseball Players and in the early days of the National League was that teams would often sign a player for next year while this season was still going on.
Mm-hmm.
Leading to questions about the loyalty of the player filling out their current contract. So if I'm currently playing for a team in Brooklyn and I get signed by a team in New York for next year, and then in a week I'm going to have my current club playing against the team I'm about to be with next year, there were real questions about, am I playing my best? Am I serving my current employer or taking care of my future opportunities? So they had to really work to figure out the details of the business model.
And that you could also probably start making questions about gambling, which is, making its way, into this game as well. So sounds like a lot of things that are, at play that's starting to turn baseball, from the exercise and recreational concept into more of the business model.
Yes. Although I will point out that the first rule about players being involved in gambling on baseball was put into the rules in 1857.
Right.
That was already a problem, but now in the earlier days there was the National Association that had a panel that you could appeal to, and the penalty was essentially this person threw baseball games for money. We're going to ban them from playing baseball, and we're going to award the trophy ball from that game to the other team. That was the outcome. Now we're talking about serious money being involved, and careers, and the idea of players being accused of throwing games becomes much more common. Richard Hirschberger is a great historian of 19th century baseball. He points out that there were probably a lot more conspiracy theories about throwing baseball games than there actually were thrown baseball games. But there were plenty of theories, so there were probably plenty of thrown games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a lot of smoke. Maybe not as much fire, but
definitely some.
Definitely smoke. Marcus, the last thing I want to ask you about here is equipment, because I can tell you, and I'm sure you get it too, with regard to the World Tournament that we just had a few days ago, that for people who've never seen it before, they are absolutely amazed that we can do what we do without a glove on.
Right.
Is there a change in mentality with regard to gloves, especially now that if we're saying pitchers are going to be, turning their elbows, and they're going to be putting a little more oomph behind a ball?
Yeah.
Has the equipment evolved to meet this?
To some extent, gloves are certainly coming into use, but they are still primarily what we, the palm gloves, the gloves that come up to your knuckles and you wear them on both hands with some padding. First baseman taking throws all day from shortstop and third, and catchers are now wearing that as well. There's an extensive discussion in the DeWitt's guide and elsewhere, where Henry Chadwick, the perennial Henry Chadwick, editor of Beatles, editor of Haney's, now editor of DeWitt's, he's making the argument that we don't need to move to overhand throwing because we have already reached with the below the hip throwing, the whip arm throwing, we've already reached the maximum velocity that we can reasonably throw, because if you can't throw harder than that and have catchers field it, right? So he's already making the point that the limiting factor on pitch speed is catchers, and the clear assumption that's built into that is catchers are barehanded or they're wearing light gloves. The idea of a big catcher's mitt and a catcher with protective equipment, that's not even in the thinking yet. The catchers are wearing gloves. They are wearing mouth guards, like rubberized mouth guards, but masks are not yet in place. Chest protectors not yet in place. Shin guards are not yet in place. I will say cups are already in place. And so there is some protection there.
Ooh, good.
But so primarily they are wearing the heavy leather gloves. And one of the reasons for that, you talked about the mindset, is that there's no injured list. If I don't play, I don't get paid in this professional game. So if I get injured from taking hard throws all day, if my hands get damaged to where I can't catch a ball, that costs me my income. So, players, to protect their livelihood, began wearing gloves. One of my favorite things, just a little less than a decade later, there's a great story in one of the Boston newspapers in 1885 where an old-timer first baseman is being criticized roundly as being selfish because he doesn't wear gloves. And the implication is he is putting the team's good fortune and the team's success at risk by putting himself at risk of injury and not being able to play because he is too selfish to wear gloves. And so the mindset around them of the public is changing and around the players, although it's certainly not universal. At our game, you're going to see gloves out in the field, but not on everybody. You'll see some people wearing them. We've gotten them to be ready to go, but they're still making their way.
Okay, so the game is that you'll be seeing this coming weekend here. It is our final in our series of kind of singular year selections here between the Knickerbocker rules, 1857, 1867, and 1876. So if you're really looking for the La-Di-Das to do something different, and really if you could argue like anybody in the state of Michigan who perhaps has never done this before, we know that there are some teams out east that play with these rules fairly regularly, and if you want to contribute your feelings to it and give your advice for how we're going to do it and what it's going to look like, then please, by all means, you can put it in the comments for what you've seen and how you've done it here. But Marcus, we appreciate you coming on board with us. For many of our players who are going to be listening in and looking for some tips and some tricks, this has been really helpful, really productive, and I think really helps us as a program go forward to be able to try different sets of rules. So we really appreciate your hard work with it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's going to be a fun day, and I wonder what we'll do next year. But this one will certainly be fun. We are going to see, I'm sure we're going to see a little bit lower scores in this game. The average score in 1876 was around 6 runs per team compared to around 20 runs per team in the mid 60s and above. But I think that's a great part of the evolution of what we're going to see in baseball, and hopefully we'll see that played out in our presentation of it. So I'm excited about what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great. It'll be maybe the most unique and different 7-5 game we've ever had on Walnut Grove here. So, so I appreciate your help with it, Marcus. We look forward to not only seeing this game. It'll be on Sunday. Saturday, we are facing off against the Continental Baseball Club of Kalamazoo in a traditional 1867 rules game, and then transitioning to 1876 on Sunday between
the unusual feature of that Continental game is that I'll be in uniform.
Marcus Dickson, baseball player, who we gotta say, we've looked at all of the some of our older village records here. Marcus Dickson was no slouch when he could get around on the ball. Like he could tag it and he could put it in play here. So don't sleep on Marcus Dickson if you've got a vintage fantasy league going and you're looking to pick up a free agent. Marcus Dixon's going to be your man to do that. So thanks again, Marcus. Thank you for your time with us here, and thank you all for listening in. So if you're able to come in this coming Sunday to take in our game here, it'll be Sunday. I believe it'll be the 17th, August 17th. At 1:30. All our games are at 1:30, but not too much time left in the 2025/1867 season. So if you were planning on coming to a game and you haven't yet, come soon, because we're running out of daylight on Walnut Grove here before autumn begins to set in, and we start thinking about Old Car Festival and seeing a bunch of Model Ts driving across our beautiful grass. And then eventually into the Halloween program and seeing the train driving by us again, but in a little bit of a different way there. So until then, strike well, be safe. We hope to see you on Walnut Grove on 1:30, where it is always 1867, except for Sunday when it'll be 1876. So take care, everybody. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you on Walnut Grove very soon.